I just sat down with Chandre and Jenifer and had this amazing conversation about inclusion, diversity, and doing impact business and the relevance of it. I definitely think you'll find some true value in it, so stay tuned. Thank you guys for joining us today. We're here with Chandre Torpet, Chief Inclusion Officer at Inclusive Matters, and Jenifer Clausell Tormos, CEO and founder of Develop Diverse. Thank you so much for coming here. As you know, today we're going to talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion, and also on the relevant matter right now on doing impact business. But before we just get started about the questions, I would like to hear a bit from you, Chandre, on what you do with Inclusive Matters.
Sure. I'm an American that's been living in Denmark for about 20 years and recently started Inclusive Matters to help senior leadership teams work their strategies with innovation, growth, and transformation by adding the cohesive version of diversity and inclusive leadership as underlying values to that business.
That's so awesome to hear. And Jenifer, what about you in Develop Diverse? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I'm Jenifer and I'm Spanish, now living with more than 7 years in Denmark. And our vision at Develop Diverse is to normalize diversity. And how we do that by helping companies attract and retain diverse and qualified talent through inclusive communication. So for that, we give them we develop a software that helps them analyze and replace the non-inclusive language into inclusive.
That's awesome. So moving into the first topic of today. So why is inclusive leadership paramount right now? And looking back 5 years, Chandre, what do you see that has changed the most, and can we in some sort of way say that it's more important now than it has been before?
Well, I have a background in executive search, so the recruitment of senior executive leaders into companies around the world. And what you tend to find or have heard over these past years is companies are trying to move towards innovation and transformation through whether it's digital or organizational. It's essentially about change. And when you need change, you have to infuse a bit of something new to what's already there. And for many companies, it became clear that we need to look at our staff, our teams, how we work together, because who we have is what got us here will not necessarily get you there.
Yeah.
So coming with new diverse ways of thinking and new people has been an increasing priority. Mm-hmm. And with that has come the need for inclusive leadership so that diverse group feels as though they have the space to speak and to grow in a company that is a bit different.
Yeah, definitely. That makes so much sense. And also, it seems like that, change management in general is kind of a bottleneck when we talk about diversity and inclusion. So for the companies who are not really have taken the first step or maybe are not sure on how to get there, as a motivation, like what are some benefits that companies can gain from becoming more diverse?
Well, there's plenty of research available that shows that diverse groups or teams perform better, they excel better. If you have more gender balance, you'll see different types of communication, which leads to a new way to resolve a situation. The research is there. It's been there for years, and it's not changing. There is a need for that. It's now for companies and leaders to be brave and say that, yes, we need diversity. We might have it at the front line, but how do we bring it up to where we are? How do we, of course, make ourselves be a part of the change?
Yeah.
And that's where I think the top layer, if you will, needs to look at that very closely.
Yeah, of course.
I would like to add something. So as Chandre said, the research has always been there, that diversity and inclusion brings more innovation and customer understanding and so on. And when I try to think what has been the difference from 5 years back to now, I was trying to think about that. And one of the reasonings is that the social movements that have been more proactive or more visible on media as well. And I think that's what has been showing our leaders that our employees are actually caring for it. And then is when they feel the need of starting to take action. I think it's this and the combination of the new generations, We have millennials. Research shows that they are about they change their job 3 times more often than the older generations because they have stronger values in terms of, not that stronger values, but they focus more on work-life balance, on employee well-being, where they have this flexibility, where they have to find a meaningful job. And the current business model of how the company has been running until today has been on sustainability has been left aside. And suddenly the new generations are asking for that more than ever.
Yeah.
And if not, they will change the job.
Truly, yeah.
So by having this combination of movements, social movements, and the young generations asking for this, makes the leaders to start taking action and developing inclusive leadership matters. You need to listen of what's the framework your employees require. If they drive the best by working more from home or flexible hours, then why not to give them to them? Otherwise, we might lose. That's why I think the activity is increasing towards inclusive leadership.
Yeah, talking about the next generation of younger business leaders and startups. So how can they learn from diversity and how past generations has done it to now, and how do they ensure that they make a lasting change?
First, just the fact that it's a newer generation means that they're seeing so much more of what's happening in our world as they fight for their careers and moving up or creating wonderful services and products. They're also very cognizant of what's happening in the world, what social media is talking about, what's on the news. And so I don't think you could meet someone from the newer, younger generation that's not aware of what's going on around, whether it's something in another country or if it's just a bigger shift. Whereas I think older generation, they have made their trajectory in their careers. They've moved up a certain way. And so what's gotten them there, they want to continue. And so sometimes it's hard to look back and say, how's the world changing? They're still trying to get themselves through their careers. So already you have a group that's a bit more aware of what's happening in the world and how to use it. So that's the first thing. They have awareness.
Yeah.
The second thing is now that you have purpose-driven businesses being built more and more every day, and impact investments is a clear sign of that. And that is actually something that's catching the attention of the bigger companies, because that's maybe not the way they have been working as much in the past. It's more about shareholder values and things like this, that there's much more results driven. Whereas I think a new generation of businesses is coming out with, well, we're of course here for business and profit, but we also make sure that we're doing it with a clear purpose. And I think that's helping as well. So the younger leaders that are coming up, I think they're already prepared to take on this change as they keep learning. So,
how do bigger companies, how do they harness all of these things going on around diversity and inclusion?
One way to go about it, how we transform this movement into a different, how do we bring this knowledge into the company and then develop this inclusive culture? I think that is relevant, and I don't think many companies do it, but it's relevant to bring those topics in the organization, talk about them, make them visible, and discuss them, so that they don't become a taboo, because it's relevant to bring an opinion about it. And the moment leaders feel comfortable to discuss about it, then employees feel also comfortable to talk about those topics. So how to do it? So there's a lot of science regarding nudging. So how can you bring some specific changes in your organization that can trigger those discussions? Some people say as simple as when putting in the toilets labels, not having a male or female, but rather having 3 of them. This is a small thing that can already bring the topic in. And then you can have pictures of leaders that are underrepresented on your organization. And this is a way, like we have sometimes Steve Jobs all over. Why not to have other Black women that are really powerful leaders and have had success? So there's small nudges that could work and develop slowly, combined with the events in the society to get your company.
Thank you for that, Jenifer. We get more pictures of other groups of leaders. I would also like to add that this is not a new topic for anybody, and companies have recognized with the staff that they have and the personnel, or however you want to call them, the families that they have, that they need to address diversity. That's the first one. I didn't say inclusion on purpose. They need to address diversity. They have to figure out, what things really look like in their own backyard. Mm-hmm. And with that, I can see you have a process that could work, and it's basically to encourage, empower, and then to endorse.
Yeah.
And I'll explain that, because encouraging is basically, you hear support. I've heard so many male leaders talk about, well, I support, women in my business, and I support them, and I know they're there, and we're working on it. And so I will push back and say, well, how are you supporting them? Is it one thing to just have a blanket statement that, yes, we agree we need to work on this? And
yeah, because that's something that we're seeing, right?
Yes. So it's an acknowledgement that there is a situation or there's an opportunity to help someone. Mm-hmm. But does it stop there? And I think in many, many companies, we're unfortunately stopping there, because there's a fear of learning what's happening. And then the learning part comes in from empowering. So if you are leading a group, and then you have diverse, elements or people in your group, making sure that they are given the chance to stand out, to do for themselves on those projects or the team that they're in, making sure that there's a connectivity to that. You could have many, many people that are in a job that don't know their manager very well. Mm-hmm. And then you have those that do know their manager. They might go on personal, when there's outings or something like this, they might talk more business about sports or about, the golf game and then you might have people that aren't into those environments or have not been invited into those environments that don't have a chance to connect. And when that connection, and that's what helps the leadership move, when you're connecting with people, then you're able to sort of tap into how we can work better together. But if you always have somebody that's an outlier and not necessarily seen in the positive way, but sort of they're over there doing their thing, they're the not lone included. Wolf. Exactly. Yeah. And this is what happens where there is a lack of empowerment of the teams you have, and in terms of the diverse nature. So if there is a diverse group in your company, I think it's important to look and see, how do they feel? Do they feel engaged? Because if you have that engagement, you start getting closer to the fact that people will open up, people will start to talk. If there is a lack of engagement, you have what's called covering. So as a Black woman, me coming into the office every day, I'm quite aware of I'm the only person there that looks like me, that I have to self-advocate. I have to take on every conversation where I'm thinking, ooh, what was just said? Did that make sense? Was that proper to say? Or am I going to let this microaggression go? So there's all this content that's happening and running through a maybe an underrepresented person's mind. Yeah. And that's so far away from, hey, that was a great, outing we did the other day where, you might have not have been invited to the company party or whatnot. Mm-hmm. So that second part is about the empowerment. The third part is about endorsement. And so there's this talk about if you're mentoring somebody, which we have a lot of mentoring programs that are helping people. Endorsing is when that person who is in a more influential situation, title, they're starting to put their skin in the game. They're starting to help. They're starting to speak up and advocate for that person that they've been empowering. Hopefully they have encouraged along the way. And when you get to that point, someone is saying, all right, I believe Rasmus is really good at this. He might be young in the game, but he's been working with me, and I think we should give him a try and do this and do that. Imagine what that feels like for that person that's coming through. It so rarely happens, I think, for minority groups. Mm-hmm. But when that happens, that's when we start having that inclusive feeling. You're being invited to the party, being acknowledged, and now you're being asked to dance. Yeah. You're at the table. And I think those are the three things that any leader, any business can begin to focus on with purpose.
So I think a way of endorsing it is also by bringing into the business KPIs. Because today, when we tell our leaders you need to be inclusive, but we also tell them you need to be really successful and increase profitability a lot, then suddenly they see themselves in a two-way road where they cannot go for both. Right. So then they feel that they only have KPI for profitability and not for anything else. So then they feel that they will be punished if they focus on something else. So by making more of a framework for building a new framework on organizations where they say our goal is that our business is sustainable. because we believe this will result in success. And suddenly you have KPIs like retention. You have KPIs about through survey success, in addition to your KPIs of sales or milestones in your product development. Then we will see how leaders, of course, they have to voluntarily go for it. But having already somebody on the upper management saying, that's okay, you can spend time with that, then we will help that this endorsement takes place easier.
And just in terms of that and KPIs and incentives, you can have anything from, for senior leaders even, people look at, bonus structure. And that's, as an example, I remember talking to a company that has started a part of their bonus is based on the fact that how many meetings, social meetings, the employee person comes to. And if you hit 90% of the meetings, and this is just the Friday wine bar or coming into a social event afterwards or something around a diversity initiative, if you're there, it's being counted. It's being held. People are being held accountable for that, and of course that triggers some people in terms of money and finance. That's a trigger, but it also starts to show that putting your money where your mouth is one point, but it begins to shift the priority. Because what gets measured gets managed. If you're not measuring it, you might not notice it, and why should we be doing it? So I think incentives and KPIs are absolutely necessary.
I think so too. It's also a motivator for change, right? How do companies avoid not just tapping into the specific time and period, and how do you actually consistently try to make yourself aware and also your company aware what's going on and where we need to go?
I think one way is by ensuring that leaders lead by example. So the moment they focus on their own values and they keep true to their own values, this will happen by default. Social media will just reflect what they are doing internally.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very simple way of going about it. But we know that many companies, they have hard time to address this internally, but they only address it on social media.
Yes.
And that's where this inconsistency comes in, and suddenly, some issues can come in, some scandals or whatever else comes in. So my number one advice for those organizations would be lead by example, look internally, what can you change, and then focus on that, and then just reflect it outside. Of course, you can still show it daily because that change have to happen slowly, but have a look on your organization and just focus there, and then it will be just obvious that you also defend that online.
All right. Yeah. Chandre, you have anything to add?
It's a tough one for a company because, of course, there's a wave of knowledge and focus on certain issues, whether it be COVID, whether it be the economic situation, and everybody and just social unrest or upheaval, I should say. What's happening is, of course, it's a period of uncertainty. And there's a statement, that companies that lead through volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, there's a special kind of leadership that's needed for that, for all of those things. Yeah. And many leaders don't have the capabilities to handle these things, just on one issue alone, much less right now we're dealing with three, huge global situations that are changing so quickly. So I can understand the sense of, let's sit back and wait just a second, because if we change this and push this button, what lever do we need to pull over here? That foresight is a challenge for many companies. But as Jenifer said, it's about also leaders are, and I'm hearing this directly, that they're feeling for the first time this conflict with themselves and what's happening around them. They know how to lead with certainty. They know how to get their numbers. They know what they need to do to make sure that their transformation or their strategy for 2020 is moving in this particular direction. And then you have all these disruptors at the same time. So you can run into the situation where it's about, we call it window dressing. A company comes out with a statement, and we focus on this, or we're geared for that, but internally there's not an alignment at all. So it is important that companies start to look within themselves. And just for example, with the pandemic, so many companies have been able to push agendas in record time. In record time.
It's been impressive. Yeah.
Because what they said was impossible just 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Wow. Everybody, we're thinking about reshuffling our brick and mortar office to something new because, hey, this actually works well. But it was taking those hard conversations with people. And there was a lot of talk about mental health and people keeping people up. Managers and leaders are calling their teams constantly because everybody's in the same boat. Everybody's feeling the same uncertainty.
That might be where the big difference is.
Exactly. Right? So when you are on even ground there, suddenly the perspectives become much more widened. And so that's one area, and then you have others. And so if people can lead with that kind of mentality and thinking, okay, we did it here, so we also need to go out and ask about, okay, we're scared about our positions, our jobs, and there have been lots of conversations, some furloughed and some, but the conversations took place. And now the next thing is here. And people, of course, there's a lot of resistance to talk, but this is the perfect time. People have actually been trained in this for the last 6 months. Yeah. They just have to be brave.
Yeah. So a message for the younger startup founders, especially in the impact space, right? So what can they take away from this?
So there needs to be this understanding that things are going to change, and you have to be able to look. This is the change agent again. You have to be able to look and see, okay, what did we do that worked? What have we not thought about? Who can we ask to get another perspective and continue along? And there will be mistakes. Yeah. There will be many uncomfortable conversations. But through those uncomfortable conversations, you build inclusivity. Because people feel like they have a voice and they have a say, whoever it is and however it is they're working. And that begins the topic of healing, but also for growth, whether it's going to be with purpose or with profit.
Definitely. Yeah, so I think one key action that they can take for that is talking to their employees, listening to them, rather than saying, we know how business is done, we tell you how to do it. Rather than doing that, like, how do you work the best yourself? And then let's find a framework that works for you. And slowly, by default, the values will come through and the inclusive culture will come through. But we need to listen to our employees. We need to listen to those ones that are driving the business, actually.
Yeah, starting with the culture.
Yeah, we need to help them work meaningfully. We need to make them work with no stress, but rather enjoying what they do every day. They will work the best if they are in a peaceful and an enjoyable environment towards versus a stressful environment. Well, that we tend to align stress is required for success, and we forget that actually happiness can bring you more creativity, more innovation, and then suddenly can bring you probably twofold a success.
But I'd be quick to say the feel-good factor, which is what we're talking about here, getting people to feel comfortable and good and all. I think there's this misconception that all starts at the grassroots level, the front line, because that's where you have the most diverse, typically the most diverse group of employees. And as you move up the hierarchical chain, it becomes more white and more male. All right. And so when we talk about we need to push this ideology of inclusion, it's fine to start here, but then it starts to trickle out. The words don't mean as much because for some reason it hasn't reached the top, that they're also a part of the solution. So how do we bring them in? And that could be a perfect example is reverse mentorships. We just talked about, before. And here I say mentorships because you have people that are younger generation, diverse background, different industry that can actually talk to these senior leaders and give them the perspective. But again, they're not being given they're being empowered to offer this. But at the same time, it's still the top level, the establishment, whoever is at the top and whatever culture that be, that has to make the decision that we are going to make this change together. Rather than it's going to make a change, go for it. Front line, make it happen.
Of course. So,
and just on a line to that, this means that we need to get to the decision makers so that we can change the way of working. We need the decision makers to also become aware. And one way is by teaching, educating, but the other way is by making them more diverse. Because the more diverse our organization at the top, at the decision maker level gets, the easier it's going to be for them to relate to the actual needs of their employees and then build this inclusive culture. But that's a tough step for those ones that are not diverse, that don't have a diverse background, because it's just obvious. That's okay as well. But by bringing in more diversity into the top, this is going to help by default that we move towards a sustainable business, because then suddenly everybody has the perspective that we need to reach there is at the table, is sitting at the table. We get all these broad angles, not only a single one, given the homogeneity of sometimes the decision maker.
Yeah.
Pools. Getting more diversity is just the way to get towards a sustainable business. So bringing equal opportunities in our organizations through making their communication inclusive, by bringing mentorships, by getting their leaders to be comfortable with it through KPIs for them. There are different ways to go about it, but this is one way towards, that's the way towards sustainable business.
I have a question then, if I may. So in societies or groups where there is a homogenous society, how do we handle that? Because you'll have groups that say, well, we don't have really this issue of diversity. There's nobody really diverse here. What do you say to that?
Well, what I would say to that, like normally when we look into the local community, or the national community, even if we wish, there is always diversity, and there is always a percentage that is not yet being represented. In the Nordics, which is is not that diverse compared to maybe the southern countries in Europe, they are still having we are not right now, we are in the Nordics, so we are still having a percentage of diverse population. So even if it looks like we are not, we are always having that diverse population in our organization, on our country. So I would say there is always such a thing. Maybe the ratio is not the same as 50-50, we could say. But I would say there's always that percentage out there.
I tend to worry a little about that, because we do have groups that are underrepresented in the workspace, and gender is one, we know that. There are other things that we don't measure, like you do in the United States, demographics based on race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation. Yet the populations do exist everywhere, and I can sort of attest to that. Yet it is a challenge, a significant challenge, to start a discussion about this, and where people want the numbers, they want the proof, and yet we can't. By law, it's not possible for companies to go out and measure these specific things. There is self-identification now, which takes place in companies, where companies can ask their employees to volunteer the information, and then it seems to be all right. And I'm hoping we move towards that. But once we begin to recognize, there is a percentage here, and those percentages are also noticed in our universities and are also graduating from our universities. But hey, we notice that not many of them have found the right opportunity in the workspace. And that's where you start to see the trend of something systemic that's much bigger happening. And I'm hoping we can move companies towards trying to recognize this.
Do you think, once again, the next generation of entrepreneurs, due to them being in another period of time, being aware of other systemic issues, do you think this will naturally push out these kind of problems by time?
If we have not reached it until now, and still today it takes 100 more years, this means that diversity will not happen by default unless we make it a milestone, we make it a goal, because that's the way to sustainable business, that's the way for a profitability. But we need to make it a goal.
And not to downplay the gender, but that is one of the easiest groups and targets that has been very obvious and to work with. For, and there's not much happening, as statistics are showing, and people are saying, and we might be experiencing in our own careers. And so if it's with this kind of result, just for gender, which is not a minority group, it's underrepresented in business, but not minority.
Right.
Imagine how it must be for any of these other groups to have that visibility. So when you say, will it go away? I think like with any major movement that's taken place in the past, there'll be a lot of legislation, there's a lot of movements around things, and people are aware of it, and there will be a shift. We will up the bar, but it's still pretty low. And so just for example, in the tech space, everyone is saying it, or STEM, everybody's saying it's hard to, find women, and I'm thinking, okay, I personally can see so many opportunities available, but companies have just chosen not to look in those particular areas or hear the suggestions that are coming. So if companies are built modeled by the bigger companies that have had so much success, then I think they're on a slippery slope, and they're going to pretty much perpetuate what's already been happening. Mm-hmm. But if they're looking, and if you from your founders have diversity in there, already there you can start the dialogue and make sure that whenever you're bringing people in, you have a diverse interviewing panel mm-hmm. every single time, every hire.
That's a great point.
Because you need to make sure that someone is triggering you to what you don't know, mm-hmm. what you're not seeing. And that is the biggest challenge, is what is it that we're not seeing? I hear a lot of companies asking us, what is it we're not seeing? And mm-hmm. I sit there and I'm like, well, there's lots. There's mm-hmm. a lot I'm not seeing. That's my bias. But someone needs to be the trigger and give that information and let it be received by senior leaders that, mm-hmm. okay, how do we start making this shift? Definitely. In a genuine way.
So that's like a testimonial to why it's important for us to keep it on the top of the agenda.
So that's why not to use technology to speed up the process. We are today using technology to find new drugs against cancer in a much faster way. That's actually my background. I was using for more than 10 years technology just to speed up the process of discovering new drugs against cancer. Yes. And we are using that for getting to understand more our space. Mm-hmm. We are using technology for driving cars in a more efficient way. Why not to use technology as well to get rid of this unconscious bias that plays a role in every day, unconscious bias that we need to survive. It has been shown we need the unconscious bias in our brains. They are hardwired for that. If we're going to cross the street and we hear a car coming by, unconsciously, we are going to not cross the road because we know this is going to be a threat. If we meet a lion, we are not going to pet it because it's a threat. Mm-hmm. And that's all working on the unconscious. So we need the unconscious. But how can we make sure that the unconscious doesn't generate side effects, such as hindering diversity or just not diversity overall, but the equal opportunities, which is what we need. We just need equal opportunities. And then by default, diversity will go this way. Yeah. So technology can, and it has been proven, and I'm happy to elaborate after on how much technology out there today there is to be able to filter the biases in all our recruitment processes, which is the first bottleneck to get into companies. Mm-hmm. And then even beyond that, there is so much technology out there. Let's use it.
And I will add to that for you, working within executive search for the 10 years I did. And it was amazing when we could make an impact and you'd have a company that says, we need a change agent. Mm-hmm. And change agent, in my word, is someone diverse. And whether it be in industry or race or nationality, whatever it is. And I've been very, very proud to help many companies who really say they're going to work this. We need the change agents. Let's bring them in. So you have that aspect. Then you have the people that we're attracting for talent. And it's not just as easy as doing a recruitment process. It is a recruitment process that takes place, but it's amazing how much time I, as a person who's diverse, would have to discuss with this potential candidate, mm-hmm. What it really means, this company really is talking like they want to make a change. Because diverse candidates, wherever they're from, they're thinking, okay, what's in this for me? It sounds like a company that, if it's in Scandinavia and they're not, a Scandinavian person, do I really want to move to Copenhagen? Mm-hmm. How do I handle this? So there's a lot of talk, and it could be anywhere else, France, and you're American. There's a lot of talk about what does this really mean? Is it really okay? And I had these conversations that I'm pretty sure my other colleagues couldn't have with diverse candidates, mm-hmm. because behind the doors we could talk about it. We could actually say, well, you're a person of color. How is it in Denmark? Yeah. And you share this. But you spend a lot of time on this, a lot of time, and a lot more time than you normally would on a particular search. That's something I've noticed, and that's one of the hard times. This is the hard conversations. But what ends up happening is when everyone is convinced and it's a win-win situation and they move, it's great. But at the same time, you also recognize that companies are maybe saying it, but not feeling it. They might have a person who's a change agent in that organization, mm-hmm. but doesn't have it's not really pushing through the organization. So you have a new person coming in, whatever background, let's just call it, they have a biology background and they're going into something completely different. Mm-hmm. They meet a culture. that is nowhere near aligned to what the new change agents are dealing with. And within a year or two, maybe the company has said, wait, this was a great initiative, but we just can't get this through. We don't know why. So they dismiss that person from their job. Or the person is sitting here thinking, I am up against a brick wall every day. It's great that there are the intentions, but the results aren't showing. And I'm not supposed to be the silver bullet that solves everything. And then they leave their position. And this has happened enough for me to realize how we're trying to solve that problem is maybe with the wrong, we're going after the symptom and not the problem.
But precisely because of this, diversity is not the solution per se. It's providing equal opportunities so that this will slowly build this, providing equal opportunities and generating this inclusive culture.
Right.
Like diversity, as you mentioned, is not enough. You bring in diverse people, but if the environment is not ready, they are going to leave. It has been shown, retention rates are very low for diverse people. Actually, if I remember right, women have a higher employee turnover, and other minorities, ethnic minorities, have even higher, about 3.5 times higher employee turnover. So this means that we do need an inclusive culture in order for diversity to work. And by bringing the culture of bringing equal opportunities, this is a mentality already on its own of having an inclusive culture. So we need to go beyond just trying to attract diversity, obviously.
So do you think this is why that one of the good solutions to that is adding representatives for this, such as we see both enterprises but also scaling startups that start to focus on hiring head of diversity or chief inclusion officers? Is this something that's just a brick that's necessary to be laid in order to make that change from inside?
You want to go?
Yeah, I did a post, an article earlier this year, the trends that I saw for 2020 in terms of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And in it, I stated that there will be there will be a surge in diversity and inclusion roles in Europe. It was the idea, the trends in Europe. One, following what's happening in the United States, not the situation, but the fact that just many companies have a diversity and inclusion or some sort of equity role leader. And it's in different ways. And of course, what happens in the US will ripple over into Europe. And so sure enough, I've seen very big companies posting or establishing diversity and inclusion roles, which I think is great. At the same time, it's paramount that these individuals are not hired to be the elixir of everything that is challenging and wrong with companies' diversity. A person is leading diversity. They're there to orchestrate and bring together the stakeholders to make sure that there's a cohesive way of working. And
that's a great point.
I'm not sure that is the main way that companies are doing this. There are different ways to set up diversity and inclusion roles in organizations. But it is a role where strategically it should be a priority. If you have a chief diversity officer or a lead, it should be seen in a strategic light. So if you're doing something that is affecting sales, would that person be able to look and say, hey, have you considered your market reach is here, your CRM system is working with this, what data can you mine from that can show us how diverse we are and where we can see opportunities for a new market or a new way to treat the market.
A whole low practical technical.
But it's a practical technical, but it's also that someone should be able to see sales here, marketing here. Are they communicating the same thing? Or are we talking in different ways? CFO or from the financial side, are we ensuring that we have the right, flexibility? How elastic are we going to be when it's going to be an investment over 2 years versus an investment that we need to see, a cycle of a year having profit? All those things play into this. And of course, the CEO, that person is going to be seen by default as the visionary.
Face of the company.
So if they're not saying anything, the silence is now deafening in this world. But before it was just, okay, they were there. But anytime a CEO, and I mean that in the nicest way, but a CEO, when they make a statement and they say, we're going to work on this and this strategy, there is an expectation that it cascades down through the company, and it becomes a priority. And sometimes you can feel it's okay, we'll work on this. And then you have managers that have to get their numbers. They have to work and be managers and lead a function.
Yes.
And on top of this, take on new conversations and how do we deal with this? That's a difficult part. Mm-hmm. So you still need to have leadership pushing, encouraging, empowering, and endorsing their own leaders who might not be diverse yet, but to bring in diversity. So absolutely, I think it's,
But just as much externally as internally, because as consumers on social media, in the network, right, what we see is basically just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah.
You see a statement from a CEO, or you see a post, but we don't see what goes after that, right? So do you think senior leaders and also basically all levels of the management has to become better at externally communicating about what you're trying to do within these fields?
And the way to answer this question is a bit picking from what Chandre said, is measuring. Mm-hmm. If we measure every department, every management level, we look at their numbers, everything from diversity numbers towards what is the goal you want to achieve, what is your success, such as sales. You want to achieve certain number of sales. Are we actually reaching out to a diverse population? When we are measuring who we are, marketing, are we reaching a diverse population? Can we reach beyond that? So if we can measure every department, every management level, if they can measure, they can see what are the numbers in their own, under their, whatever is they are responsible for, then they will find it as a very normal and just natural to actually take care of that by themselves. So of course they need to have the top, the CEO level needs, the C level needs to encourage it. But if they can see whatever they can improve, where can they make, can do improvements just by looking at the numbers, this will help empower every single individual. And where then there is not that much pressure only from the top, but happens also organically in every level.
But it's also, we've seen companies that have had to apologize for a scandal, whatever it is, racial insensitivity or, whatever situation was big in the news, let's say that. The apologies, the optics of it for maybe the group that's in the majority, they say, oh, it's great, it's apology, it's no problem. They came out, it seems heartfelt. Mm-hmm. The minority groups might think completely differently. It's like, oh, okay, they're sorry. Oops, we won't do it again, which is, this is now many, many, many times over many, many, many periods that they've heard the same kind of messaging. So it seems disingenuous. It doesn't seem authentic. And then the question is, all right, you've made the apology externally, but what's happening internally? Yeah. And that's the perfect point where when it comes to marketing, that's the easiest place to see. You have industries that are selling products to consumers, and their products are coming out being a little, they hadn't been thought through. They hadn't been vetted. And nobody had bothered to say, hey, you might be, let's look at it from a different perspective. If you heard this perspective, would you still sell this product? Yeah. It's not being done. Mm-hmm. So solving the problem, or, the first time you make a mistake, it could be seen as an accident. The second time you make the mistake, it's a choice. And that sends signals to the consumers. If you keep doing this, why should we be buying your products? So it does have an impact on the business.
All right. Thank you guys so much for showing up today, wanting to sit down and discuss these topics with me.
Thank you, Rasmus.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like the video and maybe want to amplify it, please go like and share just down below.